Welcome to the Parsha Pairings with Jeff and Sherry. I'm Jeff Friedlander.
And I'm Sherry.
And we're glad you joined us. This week's Parsha is called Vayechi, and it means, and he lived. It comes from Genesis chapter 47, verse 18, through chapter 50, verse 26. It is the end of the first book of the Torah, Genesis. The Haftorah this week is from 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. And the Brit Hadashah, or New Testament reading, is John chapter 13, verses 1 through 19, and 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 1 through 9. We ended last week's Parsha with Egypt permitting themselves to be enslaved. As they were desperate for food, they gave themselves over and compromised everything, needing it. While Israel, in the land of Goshen, the 70 that had come, flourished. They attained land, they attained blessing, and they were growing. And that's where we pick up the story in Genesis chapter 47 and beginning in verse 28. Sherry, why don't you get us started here?
So the Parsha opens with Joseph being told that his father Jacob is sick and he's gotten older. And before we move on into the story, I wanted to make a note, just as a summary now of Jacob's kind of life, what we've observed of him throughout the different Parshas. We know that Jacob has sojourned twice in his life, right? He left the land of Canaan and had to go to Haran. And back in Parsha Vayechi, it tells us that Jacob left Beersheba and went towards Haran. Then in Parsha Vayeshev, he's come back into Canaan, and it says now Jacob dwelled in the land where his fathers had sojourned. So he got to come back. And here we are in Parsha Vayechi, and we have him saying now, Jacob lived in the land of Egypt for 17 years. So Jacob has been all the way up north to Haran, traveled back down, lived in Canaan, and now he's gone back out and he's in Egypt. So he's had this long life full of all kinds of twists and turns. And we have here as this Parsha opens up and Joseph hears that his father is sick. Jacob is imploring Joseph, please do not let me be buried here. You have to take me back to the family plot, back to Machpelah, and let me be buried in the land.
And he says that in verse 29, and when the time drew near that Israel must die, he called his son Joseph, if I have found favor in your sight, put your hand under my thigh, which is a symbol of a promise that means the most to a person. It is intimate promise. To deal kindly and be true, and do not bury me in Egypt. Let me lie with my fathers.
Please don't let me stay there.
Carry me out of Egypt, bury me in the burying place. And he said, and Joseph answers him, he commits to him, I will do as you have said. And he said, swear to me. So not only has he got the hand there, he's told him to swear, he says, swear to me. So he swore to him, and then Israel bowed himself upon the head of his bed.
Right.
And so we pick up the story now in chapter 48, where he's ill and we're moving forward.
Yeah, so he's been here in Egypt for 17 years. His health is declining, but he wants to rally together and he wants to pray over Manasseh and Ephraim. And Jacob begins to talk to Joseph and the boys, and he's telling them about the promises that Adonai made to him. And he blesses Ephraim and Manasseh and does something very profound.
When he takes them, Ephraim and Manasseh, this is a very rich, but it's a very critical understanding of the rest of the Bible. If you kind of get this picture that's done here, the rest of the Bible will really start to make a lot of sense to you. Ephraim and Manasseh are born to Joseph and a pagan princess. Sherry, this pagan princess was Pharaoh's daughter.
Right.
Or no,
not Pharaoh. It was one of the priest of On's daughters.
Priest of On, that was the name. Yeah, the priest of On. And On was a priest to the god Ra, which was a major god. So Joseph has married this woman. Now they've had these two kids, Ephraim and Manasseh. We've mentioned them in the past Parshas. We've talked about the meanings of their names. But now they're getting the blessing, which is very strange because Joseph is the son.
Right.
And Jacob's going to bless the 12 sons. We're going to see that in this parsha. He's blessing all 12 of them, or he's speaking prophetically. Some of them aren't getting a blessing. They're really, he's saying, hey, I love you, but some of them like Simeon and Reuben and even Levi.
Don't jump us ahead.
Okay.
That's coming. That's
okay,
coming.
they don't get a blessing. Sneak peek. So, so he takes them, and he's going to bless the grandsons, and he says to them that he wants to take them and make them like his own.
Yeah.
So he's moving them out of that pagan world and saying, okay, I know that you were born of this pagan princess, of Pharaoh of Egypt, but no more. Joseph, your children are now my children. This is Jacob speaking.
And he's actually taking them out of grandchild status into primary child status.
It's a full adoption.
It really is.
It's a full
adoption.
adoption.
It's a shift of their position even in the line.
Yeah, so as they get shifted, now we're going to watch him bless them. So he's going to take his right hand, which is the hand of blessing. He's going to put it on Ephraim. Mm-hmm. Well, Ephraim is the younger child. So Joseph freaks out. Joseph is like, hey, Dad, wrong move. You got to move that. Your hands are in the wrong place. You're blessing the youngest one with the firstborn blessing. Right. You can't do that. And so, Jacob answers him and says, I know, my son. I know
what I'm doing. And what's interesting about this is we see that the story has a lot of repeat in it throughout Genesis. And we see again here, the scripture tells us that Jacob, like his father Isaac, his eyes had grown heavy with old age.
Yeah.
And Isaac, remember, was blind when Jacob tricked him.
Yeah.
And so now we've got this scenario where Jacob's not being tricked. He's intentionally switching the blessing. And he does. What happens in this, in essence, is Joseph is now receiving the firstborn blessing.
Yeah.
Because there's two components to a firstborn blessing. And we're going to be kind of looking into this in this parsha. One is the firstborn received double portion. Mm-hmm. Because they were also now going to become the leader.
Right.
So you have a leadership role and you get a double portion.
Yeah.
So Joseph is receiving that part of the firstborn blessing of a double portion because now his sons are going to have two portions.
His two sons.
Two sons are going to have two portions of the land when they get into the promised land.
And so he says to him in verse 19, but his father refused to move the right hand onto the older kid. And he says, I know, my son, I know. I can just hear the old, I know. He also, speaking of Manasseh, the older son, shall become a people, and he also shall be great. Nevertheless, his younger brother, now speaking of Ephraim, shall be greater than he. And his offspring, and here it is, this is the key verse to unlock a lot of the Bible to you. And his offspring, the offspring of Ephraim, shall become a multitude of goyim, or a multitude of nations. And this is where we interpret the word. We actually translate this word in many Bibles as Gentile throughout most of the Bible.
Right.
So here is Ephraim, who has been adopted into the family from the paganism, if you will, of his mother.
Right. The mixed blood. He has mixed blood.
No, you're not going to be that. You are now firstborn. You're getting part of the double portion blessing, and you're my son. You're Jacob's son, not just Joseph's son. Right. Now you're out of grandchild status, right? And who are you going to be? What is going to happen to you? You're going to be the fulfillment of the nations. In other words, all the blessings that are of Israel are going to come to the nations through Ephraim. Now later, what we're going to find out is this is true. This is what happens when the kingdoms split. When we go to a southern kingdom, Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, and the northern kingdom, the other 10 tribes, the biggest tribe is Ephraim. And Ephraim encompasses, in fact, many times in the book of Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and other places.
Right, the prophets refer to them as Ephraim.
Yeah, it'll interchange. It'll say, well, Israel is this, and then the next verse will say, Ephraim is this.
Right.
And it's referring to the same group.
The 10 tribes of the northern kingdom.
So we see that promise is going to come true. And in fact, in the future, when the kingdoms are split, this nation, Ephraim, this northern nation, is going to be attacked by Assyria, and they're going to be brought into captivity, and then they're going to be dispersed to over 120 nations.
Right.
And to this day, they've never come back. Yeah. So this is Israel taken away by Assyria as a promise that who becomes the fullness of the nations, the sons of Ephraim, the sons of these 10 tribes, actually is who fills up the nations. But the hope, and what we learned last week in the Ezekiel prophecy, and will be reiterated today, is those 2 sticks, this Judah stick,
right,
the Jews that stayed in the southern kingdom,
right,
and now the Ephraimites, or the Israelites that were spread throughout, that one day in the future they will come back together to be reunited.
And if you remember in the Ezekiel 37 prophecy, he also refers to the stick of Ephraim. He doesn't call it the stick of Israel. He says the stick of Ephraim and the stick of Judah.
And so he understood. Ezekiel understood what we're talking about right now in Genesis. He was cleared into that, cued into that. He understood what was happening. This is a key to understanding being a believer today. Us as followers of Messiah are part of, Paul says, the commonwealth of Israel.
Yeah.
We are no longer citizens of the world. We have now become citizens of Israel. Now, this is not natural Israel.
Right.
We didn't become Jews if we were not Jewish. We didn't become natural citizens of the geographic land of the civic nation Israel that's over in the Middle East.
You really have to adjust your thinking from that linear, everything in order thinking to you've got a spiritual Israel and you've got natural.
Yeah.
And I think, it's challenging because so much teaching out there teaches us that there's a replacement, that, the church has replaced Israel, or that Israel no longer has a position with God, that they lost status of being favored. But it's really hard from this perspective and then to read the rest of the scripture to not see what God's hand was on.
That's
that
right.
God the promises were made to the children of Israel.
That's right. When you understand this, what you see is replacement theology, which says, as Sherry said, the church has replaced Israel and Israel no longer has a future calling, is unbiblical. It's heretical, because the reality is there are 2 nations here.
Right.
There's the nation of Judah, the Jews, who have complete purpose all the way to the end of days. They are still called of God, the people of God, the chosen of God, and there is a calling on the Jews. And then there is this, Ephraim, the Ephraimites, the northern tribes that have been spread in the fullness of the Gentiles throughout the nations, and those who now follow the Messiah are now part of this commonwealth of Israel. They are part of, we're Ephraimites, if you want to say it that way.
Right.
And biblically, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, because one day, Israel, those who are a part of this, and Judah, Jews, will come to one. Again, the 2 will become one. It's a beautiful picture here, and it's so prophetic in what it says.
So I wanted to jump back real quick to verse 15 and give a really cool little point here about Jacob's blessing to Joseph.
Yeah.
This is before he blesses Joseph with all the brothers. So he gives him this separate blessing, and he said, he ends it with, may he bless the boys, and may they be called by my name, talking about Ephraim and Manasseh, and by the name of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac. And then he says, may they multiply to a multitude in the midst of the land. Now, here's something interesting. The Hebrew is going to tell you a little different story than our English version. So that word multiply is the word dagah, which is the root word dog. And you know the root word of dog is?
Click. Fish.
Fish. Yeah. So what he could be saying here, what the Hebrew is telling us, is may they fish and spread and spawn into a multitude in the midst of the land.
Now, where else, everybody, have we thought about this idea?
That's where Yeshua got the idea of become fishers of men?
Yeah, so this is, again,
Dagah of the multitude. So interesting what the Hebrew reveals to us. And then also in this blessing to Joseph, we see another theme that we've seen since really Genesis 3:15, the promise that there's a seed there's a blessing, and there's a land promise. It's
Three things,
all
and it goes all through.
right here in this blessing he gives to
He
Joseph.
also says, just for those of you who are interested, says, but you, Israel, will pronounce blessings, saying, God make you as Ephraim and as Manasseh.
Yeah.
Now, he says, you, Israel, do this. So what is he saying? It's kind of in a command form to God to make you, the children, make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. In other words, bless you, give you these blessings. And that is a tradition that has been passed on.
Right.
When we celebrate Shabbat, it is traditional to put your hands on your children and bless them and say, may God make you as Ephraim and Manasseh. And this is where that tradition comes from. It's out of this passage in Genesis.
So now we move into chapter 49, and this is where we get to really the meat of these blessings.
Yeah.
Jacob calls all the sons together, all 12 of them, and now he's going to bless them individually. And we could spend hours and hours and hours dissecting each blessing that he gives.
Maybe what we'll do, Sherry, is just go through them very fast and just kind of give a sentence or something, just kind of a summary, because there's a lot here, and we can't really dig into all of it. But he says to Reuben, he says, Reuben, the name, my might and the first fruits of my strength, preeminent in dignity, preeminent in power, but unstable as water. Bottom line is, Reuben messed up.
Yeah.
In fact, Reuben messed up so bad.
Now, Reuben's the firstborn,
so he
should be getting the firstborn blessing, but he doesn't. And remember, part of that firstborn blessing is to be the ruler, and we see in his lineage something really interesting.
Yeah, Reuben turns out not only to be weak and a problem, but he turns out so bad that in Reuben's history, his family lineage, not one judge, not one prophet, not one king comes from Reuben.
No leadership at all.
Move on to Simeon and Levi. They both are connected to violence. It says, Simeon and Levi are brothers. Weapons of violence are their swords. Let my soul come not into their counsel. Oh, my glory not be joined to their company. For in their anger they killed men, and their willfulness they... So this whole prophecy or blessing is not really a blessing. It's basically Jacob saying, Simeon and Levi, you guys were so violent.
Well, they're the men. They're the ones that tricked the men of Shechem into circumcision, and then went and brutally killed them.
Killed them.
So he's just calling them out.
He just calls them out. And he says, "Look, I'm dividing you guys up." And what happens is they actually get divided. They're trying. In fact, Simeon's tribe doesn't fare well at all.
No.
He gets divided up so much that he almost disappears from history tribally. Levi fares a little better. He gets divided up, but both Simeon and Levi get no land, essentially. Simeon melts into nothingness. Levi redeems himself. And we find this out in a future Parsha with Moses. When they come back with the golden calf, the tribe of Levi is the only tribe to stand up with Moses and take righteousness and justice to its conclusion. And because of that, God redeems Levi's tribe, and Levi is now, they still don't get any land, but they do become the tribe of priests. So they fare better, and yet this prophecy ends up being true.
So the next blessing is over Judah, who is actually the fourth-born son of Leah.
Right.
And I want to read this blessing because actually Judah and Joseph's blessings are the two largest blessings, and Joseph's edges it out just a little bit, even of Judah. But Judah's blessing is, so you are, your brothers will praise you, your hand will be on your enemy's neck, your father's sons will bow down to you. A lion's cub is Judah. From the prey, my son, you have grown up. He crouches and lies down like a lion or a lioness. Who would rouse him? The scepter will not pass from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs will come. To him will be the obedience of the peoples, binding his foal to the vine, his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and in the blood of grapes his robe. His eyes are darker than wine, and teeth that are whiter than milk. Wow, I am sure when you're hearing that, many will go, oh, that connects here and connects there. But let's kind of bring some of these points up and lift them up off the page.
All right, so the scepter will not depart from Judah, this first part of this blessing, and your son, you whom your brothers will praise, we see. So this, what does this mean? Well, the brothers will praise. Judah wasn't exactly exemplary with his brothers.
Right.
You know, he had messed up a lot. So I think this phrase really speaks of one thing, First, that Judah's being elevated to the leadership position of firstborn in a sense. And secondly, it really speaks to God's grace. It really speaks to the way that God has redeemed Judah, and he is going to give his tribal history, he's going to give his children and his children's children a beautiful place to say, I am going to bless you at such a level that even your brothers will praise what you have done. You know, there's a bunch of scriptures about when the righteous rule, even the wicked rejoice. And so no matter what the brothers think, at this point when Judah becomes this way, God's grace does things.
I think it's also an interesting connection, what we were talking about, how Joseph receives the firstborn blessing, and he is in the northern tribe, northern area when the kingdom divides. But now you've got Judah, who is also receiving the same blessing. Remember, Joseph has this dream that his brothers are going to bow down to him. And he receives the firstborn blessing, and he's planted in the northern kingdom. And now you see God prophetically taking that dream that even was given to Joseph and is being placed on Judah, who's now getting a portion of that firstborn blessing.
Right, what did you say earlier? You said that the firstborn blessing included a double portion of land.
Of land, which Joseph got through his two sons.
Joseph got that.
And here we're going to see what you just brought up. The other part is you become the leader of the tribe. Here is where Judah is now getting the leadership, because now this king is going to come through him, which we know prophetically. And even all rabbinic sources, scholars all around, ancient sources, all agree this is a messianic prophecy.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. This is messianic. This whole setup here, according to all the rabbinic sources, according to ancient sources
modern scholars, Mid-Eastern, all the scholars agree that this is a messianic prophecy. But we're seeing here that Judah is receiving, so the firstborn blessing has these two components, and Joseph gets the one, but he doesn't get the rulership part of it. Judah doesn't get the double land portion, but he gets the leadership portion. So Jacob does something really unique here in these blessings. He doesn't follow protocol. He does, of course, he's reversed the blessings on Ephraim and Manasseh, but he's also almost in a way, he is prophetically being moved by the Spirit of God to anoint the firstborn into both kingdoms. Because God knows what's about to come down the road.
And this is what's so interesting, and this is why the Bible is so spectacular and beautiful. There's no way Jacob understands what he's really doing in his mind at this moment. This is thousands of years in the future. We're going to see these two kingdoms, and we're going to see the split, and we're going to see the Messiah come out of one. This is so futuristic in what's going on. In fact, it's hundreds of years before we see some of this. Let me just go into that as a matter of fact.
Well, can I just make one more little point? Because the point you make there is actually, and Jacob, I don't think, can see it, but he does say to them in verse 1 when he calls them together, he says, "Gather together so that I can tell you what will happen to you in the last days."
Oh, wow.
In the last days lets us know he recognizes, I'm speaking something. He may not see it and understand it because he's under, I think, the anointing of the Spirit of God.
Wow.
He's speaking forth God's words, but he understands there's something about this that is going to be happening in the future. That's a very prophetic phrase that Jacob uses.
That is a great
as
point.
He begins.
All right, so he says here, you whom your brothers praise as a lion, and he says the scepter will not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet. To him shall be the obedience of the people. So these are all little phrases that are referring to Judah's ruling position, that he is the ruler, and he's inheriting that leadership of rulership that we've talked about. And it's interesting, we're going to find out, he talks about it, until Shiloh comes.
This is such an interesting phrase.
He's the leader until Shiloh comes. So this idea that there is a place where eventually someone from the tribe of Judah is going to rise up, and it will no longer be, it's going to pass to this one, which is referred to as Shiloh.
Now, let me make a note real quick, because
Yeah.
if you're reading along with us in your word, many of the English versions don't use the word Shiloh.
Yeah.
It says, until he to whom it belongs will come.
And that's the definition of Shiloh.
And in the Hebrew, it says until Shiloh. So I just wanted
Yeah, no,
to
it's good.
understand that your English will not say that probably.
Well, the word Shiloh means to he whom it belongs.
Right.
So, in other words, he's going to hand over rulership, authority, the lion, the predatory nature, all of those things. It's all going to be handed over to the one to whom it actually belongs. In other words, Judah is a steward. He is given this land. He's given this authority temporarily.
Right.
He's stewarding it for the one that's going to come, which all scholars agree, as do we, this is the Mashiach. This is the Messiah when the Messiah comes. In fact, the leadership of this does take a while. The leadership prophecy of this took 640 years to fulfill in part. Then the reign of David. David becomes from the tribe of Judah and one of the leaders in the dynasty of the kingdom. Then another 1,600 years goes by, and Yeshua comes to the planet. The Messiah comes. And Yeshua is referred to as Shiloh.
Wow.
Whose right it is. Who has the right to take this authority? None other than the Messiah.
Now, speaking of David, David understood this prophecy. And understand, these things are being passed down from generation to generation. And David, it writes many of the Psalms, but there's two of them that are identical. You have Psalm 60, verse 9, and Psalm 108:8. And these are penned by David, and he says this: Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is a helmet for my head, and Judah is my scepter.
Wow.
So David understands his position, where he is in this lineup, and he understands that out of this tribe of Judah, through his lineage is going to come this scepter that's going to be passed. It's just landing with him.
Yeah.
But he understands it's going forward, because it is, again, understood this is a messianic king who's going to rule and reign, and David understood this.
And let me bring one more psalm into that. One more little step down, if you will. Psalm chapter 110 says, the Lord says to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool, and I will send out my scepter to rule over them. So here we see the same word, the scepter, again, that this idea that the tribe of Judah, and the descendants of Judah are going to be the scepter that goes out, as David talks about in those Psalms you brought up. And so that Psalm 110, is considered a messianic prophecy. The Lord says to my Lord, speaking of the Father speaking to the Son, and Yeshua even quotes that psalm in the New Testament when he talks about it. And we find out, who is this scepter then? Well, it was the Messiah. He's the original scepter. But he's not here. So now it's all the followers of Messiah. Those who are born again, those who are believers, those who are filled with the Spirit of God in the Messiah. We are now on the earth, his scepter going forward. We are in that tribe of being a scepter, if you will. It's a beautiful picture, really. Rulership, really beautiful picture. Now, lastly about Judah here, a couple things real quick, is that a bunch of people did come from him in the natural, just for your knowledge. Isaiah was of the tribe of Judah. Amos, Habakkuk, Joel, Micah, Obadiah, Zechariah, and Zephaniah, all part of the tribe of Judah. So pretty big prophetic literary giants coming out of Judah there. We find out that Zerubbabel was also part of the tribe of Judah. Zerubbabel is part of the three people, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, that came back from exile to rebuild Jerusalem and the temple. And then we see many others, obviously the greatest of which is Yeshua HaMashiach, Jesus the Messiah in the New Testament, all part of Judah.
So we go on. Jacob continues blessing. He gives a blessing over Zebulun, Issachar, Dan, Gad, Asher, Naphtali. But then he gets to Joseph.
Yeah.
And now we have Joseph's blessing, which is again a very long blessing. He gets that second part of the firstborn blessing of getting the double portion. And I'm just going to read his blessing over us as well. So, a fruitful son is Joseph, a fruitful son beside a spring. Daughters walk along the wall. The archers were bitter and shot arrows and were hostile towards him, these brothers of his. Yet his bow was always filled and his arms quick moving by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. We read that over and over in the Parsha. God is with him. God is with him. From there, a shepherd, the stone of Israel. Yeah. Maybe the cornerstone on which it's all built. Maybe the rock of ages. From the God of your father who helped you, and Shaddai who blesses you, with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lie below, blessings of the breast of the womb. The blessings of your father surpass the blessings of the ancient mountains, and the desire of the everlasting hills. May they be upon Joseph's head, upon the crown of the one set apart from his brothers.
So what a beautiful, incredible blessing. It's the longest one, as we said. It does have many features here. We don't have time to get into all the details of it. But what we realize is there is a huge blessing that's re-emphasized over Joseph because of the Almighty. He's blessed in three different ways. We see one, he's blessed by the dew of the heavens. Secondly, he's blessed by the springs and the fountains of the deep that lies below. And thirdly, he's blessed by the breast and the womb. So this tribe from Joseph becomes the largest tribe, Ephraim and Manasseh combined together. It's the largest landmass. It's the largest blessings of fruitfulness. And we see living water coming out of this tribe. Now, what's interesting is, coming out of Ephraim, and probably the greatest part of this that we could kind of talk about in this blessing is, Ephraim is this northern tribe. And where does Messiah come from? Messiah comes from Bethlehem, but he's raised in Galilee, in Nazareth, which is part of the Galilee region. And he ministers in Galilee most of his ministry. And it's called in Isaiah the Galilee of the nations. Which is Ephraim will be the fullness of the nations from our Parsha last week. We talked about that. So we see this blessing of this huge portion over Joseph, this huge portion that will come to pass, living water, literally the dew of the land. Wow. And if we just want to be a little bit more deep today, no pun intended by deep waters, as we get ready to wrap up this Parsha, it is interesting in the Psalms, we read about unity, that how good and how pleasant it is when brothers dwell together in unity. Yeah. And it says that it is like the dew of Mount Hermon. Yeah. Now, interesting, that dew that comes off Mount Hermon is where the headwaters of the Jordan River are. Wow. And right where those headwaters begin to flow is a little city called Caesarea Philippi. At that city, Caesarea Philippi, where the dew of the mountain flows, Yeshua revealed for the first time to his disciples that he was the Messiah. So all of these scriptures come together from Genesis all the way forward to the revelation of the Messiah and the dew and the blessing of the living water. Wow. Well, so powerful. So let's just we'll wrap this up with chapter 50. Jacob does die. Yeah. Joseph does appeal to Pharaoh to carry him back to Canaan. He does. He buries Jacob in Mount Machpelah. And this whole parsha ends with Joseph's death. And something very interesting, again, the Hebrew was going to reveal to us. So the last verse says, Joseph died at 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Now, when we read that, you go, oh, well, that makes sense. Of course, he was placed in a coffin. But the word there is not coffin. What word is it? The word in Hebrew is aron, which is the ark. It's an ark. He was placed in an ark. Now, fast forwarding to what's going to happen in Exodus, because he makes the brothers promise, don't leave me here. Make sure you carry my bones out, because God's going to remember you. Y'all are going to be in some trouble for some years, but God's going to remember.
carry me out of here. And they do. When they go in the Exodus, we know they carry Joseph's bones out and they're in the ark. And so when they're traveling through the desert in that after the Exodus, they're carrying this ark with Joseph's bones, but then they're also carrying the ark of the covenant, because that we know that's where the commandments go, and then the rod of Aaron and the manna goes in there.
Yeah.
And so there's two arks that will be traveling through the desert. It'll be fun to discover what those look like and what that means in the Parshas in Exodus.
Yeah,
but that's a preview of what's to come.
So we have, closing out the book of Genesis, we've traveled from the creation of all that is to the people of God and the final patriarchs dying. And we're going to pick up the story in the next Parsha 400 years later. Yeah. With Moses and the children of Israel in slavery. But Genesis sets the table for the entire book. Everything you want to know about our story as followers of Messiah begins in the book of beginnings, Genesis. Thank you for being with us. We look forward to being with you next time. God bless you and shalom.
Shalom.